Good afternoon. Raise your hands above your head and down. One more time. And down. And roll your head one way and roll your head the other way. This has nothing to do with my story, but I figure it's 4 something in the afternoon. We all needed that. So I'm going to start my story by actually telling part of someone else's story. You might have heard of this person. His name is Auguste Renoir, famous French impressionist at the turn of the last century. Well, it turns out that Renoir suffered from rheumatoid arthritis. So in his later years, he was in his 70s, he moved to the south of France near Nice, and he used to go to his studio and paint every day. The studio was in an olive grove. But because of the onset of this rheumatoid arthritis, he had to be helped into his studio. And during this time, he continued to paint literally every single day. In his late 80s, the rheumatoid arthritis got so bad that they had to bandage his hands. And at the very end, or very near the end, his son and assistant would lift him in his wheelchair, take him to his studio, and insert the paintbrushes between the bandages so that he could continue to paint every day. Turns out that he lived until he was 86 years old and died in 1919. And he was actually painting on his last day. And as they pulled the paintbrushes from his bandages, he looked at his son and he said, "I think I'm beginning to understand something about it." After 86 years and being a great painter. I think I'm beginning to understand something about it. So a few observations or comments in terms of this very brief story. Number one, I wonder what Renoir meant about the it in the sentence, "I think I'm beginning to understand something about it." What was that it? Let's take that, bracket it, and put it on the side for a minute. The second thing I'd like to observe of Renoir and his life and his work, and that of many, many great artists, is that creativity is not a gift. It is a quest. And this quest shapes and forms our entire life, even to the last day. And the third observation is that this quest is underwritten and supported by a set of core creative skills that I call the middleware of creativity. So those are some observations. Now, how does my story intersect with this? Well, I'm not going to take you all the way back to Brooklyn. For some reason, people who are born in Brooklyn have to always bring that out. But I was born in Brooklyn, and I'll fast forward to graduate school, earning a doctorate in history, and then teaching for a while. But in a very short period of time, I quickly realized that scholarship was really not for me. So I left the academic world, and I kind of meandered around for a little bit, and I meandered my way into financial services, and I got a job working for a Fortune 500 company. And over a period of the next 21 years, I actually had multiple careers within that one organization. And back then, so I built the number one sales division in the company. And then there was an idea floating around then, which was the concept of the corporate athlete. And the corporate athlete was thought to be someone who didn't have deep expertise or specialty, but someone who had enough versatility that they could be moved around the organization and add value. So I was recruited to that position. I was the guinea pig for the company. And over a period of the next couple of decades, I was a serial entrepreneur, or intrapreneur, I should say, someone who started businesses. So I had the opportunity to run a multi-billion-dollar investment company. I ran marketing businesses, started a marketing business for a 10,000 advisor network. I got involved in global strategy and other kinds of things. It was a good life. I thought I was doing good work, worthy work. I thoroughly enjoyed the people that I was working with. I was growing and learning professionally. But then, in my early 50s, something began to roil around inside of me. I had no idea what it was, All I know is that I needed to pay attention to it. So what does one do when someone feels something roiling around inside of them and wanting to pay attention to it? Well, they enroll in a sculpture workshop. What else? So I did that. Now, you have to understand that I had not taken an art class since the 7th grade. So I really had no art background whatsoever. But I had wonderful mentors and teachers who prodded me, who helped me. And I learned the 9 subcrafts of bronze sculpture. And then I began to enter pieces into juried shows. And I got some encouragement. And after about 2.5 years of doing this on the side, my teacher said, "Fred, you're ready." I said, "What does that mean?" They said, "Ready for one-person show." So I had a one-person show of my work, and that's a self-sculpture in case you don't recognize it. Over here. Lo and behold, much to my surprise and wonderment, people actually put down good hard cash to buy some of my pieces. So I thought that there was something here, and I really began to dive into this sculpture work much more seriously while holding my day job as a senior executive in the company. And then I decided, well, it was really time to pursue this art thing a lot more seriously. So in 2001, I stepped away from the corporate world, having no idea what I would be doing next. The person who I was back then would be totally shocked that I'd be talking to a crowd of characters like this 10 years later, but nonetheless, that was the story at that point in time. So I really didn't know what was going to come next. All I knew was that I needed to pursue this art a lot more seriously. Well, I then entered a period of strange discomfort, if you will. And what I mean, an example of that is for probably the first 18, 24 months of leaving the corporate world, when someone would approach me or I met someone, they'd say, "Fred, what do you do?" And my response was always, "Well, I'm a former business executive." Think about that. I define myself in terms of what I used to do, not in terms of what I did. And I began to wonder about this, and clearly that was an unsatisfactory answer for them, and it was unsatisfactory to me. Nonetheless, I did not feel comfortable in bringing this whole explanation about personal change to the surface and really talking about that. So I decided what I really needed to do was to go deep inside and really kind of come up with an explanation. So I really began to do a lot of reflection, a lot of self-retreats, in which I peeled the emotional onion, so to speak, asking myself, well, Fred, what really torches your soul? What is it that really energizes you? And I came up with what I now call my creative mantra. And it consists of 3 different words: create, integrate, make a difference. And then I thought, well, that was kind of neat, but I'm living this life, I'm pursuing this artwork, but really I needed to take this creative mantra and apply it to my life in a way that my behaviors, in terms of what I did, totally aligned with my creative mantra. So every morning when I woke up, I would say to myself, Fred, what are you going to do today to create, integrate, and make a difference? And I had to come up with very specific answers. And then at the end of the day, before going to bed, I would say to myself, or ask myself, Fred, what did you do today in order to create, integrate, and make a difference? So for me, this notion of creating basically means when I am creating, I am both lost and found. And that's a wonderful place to be. Integration to me is all about learning and taking what you learn and integrating it into your relationships, into your work relationships, your personal relationships, and sharing what you're learning with the rest of the world. And to me, I believe that I'm at my highest and best self when I'm making a difference in the lives of others. So I kept on repeating this mantra, and I had to come up with specific ways in which I was doing it. Now, the mind is a wonderfully inventive thing, as we know, and it can play tricks on you. So while I was repeating this mantra to myself, it doesn't mean that I was really living it in full alignment. So what I decided to do was then to take out my calendar. That's a holy book because it's how you invest your time. It's the texture of your life. And I took my calendar and I wrote my creative mantra on the after every single week. And then I began to go down the list and I would say, oh, here's a meeting, here's an appointment, here's an event, here's a commitment. How does that align with my creative mantra? And if it did not, I would exit off, I'd meet the commitment, but I would not repeat it. The ones that did align, I would try to do more of. And over a 3-month period of time, I could then look at my calendar and I could look at my creative mantra and I could say that I was living my creative mantra. And now I began to put on the back of my card. So when I give out my business card, it has 2 reference points. The first is, I'll hand it to someone, I'll say, these are my coordinates. If you ever want to contact me, this is the information, my phone number, my website, my email. And then I flip it over, and my creative mantra is on the other side. And I will say, but if you want to know what I'm about as a human being and what really tortures my soul and gets me excited, this is who I am. So that was my creative mantra. But something else was going on the side of that, and that is during that time in my transition into pursuing my artwork, I did a deep dive into the lives and working process of the great masters of art. I read books, biographies, autobiographies where they were available, their letters, their sketchbooks, because the question in my mind at that point in time was, what accounts for their creative output over a lifetime? That sustained creative output. And of course, in my own mind, the first answer was genius. I mean, who could deny that Picasso or Rembrandt or Da Vinci were not geniuses? But I quickly became disenamored with that idea because there had been many geniuses in the art world, as well as in other fields of endeavor, whose work never rose to the level of sustained creative output. So there must have been something else in play. In addition, I discovered that there were many great, great artists who started out very slowly. Some of them almost flunked out of art school because their drawing was so bad. Matisse, as an example. So there must have been something else in play. And what I came up with, and at that point I met the woman who became my co-author, Kathy Jordan, was there are certain core skills that went beyond pure talent, that went beyond genius, that enabled them to develop and sustain creative output over a period of time. And this is, so that was going on as I was doing that work. At the same time, I began to interview people informally who were going through personal change. Here I was going through this change, and I was wondering, well, do other people experience the same kinds of things that I'm experiencing? And it became pretty clear that there was an interesting dynamic going on. I was interested in the arc of their narrative. Thank you, John. But I was also interested in the underneath stuff that was going on with them and how those two things matched up. And what became absolutely fascinating to me was that I came to realize that life change is a fundamentally creative process, and that process mirrors the creative process that the great masters employed when they created their great bodies of work. That was one thing. The second thing I realized was that what I identified as the core creative skills were in fact life skills. And that when those skills were present, people were able to navigate change successfully. And when they were absent or diminished, people struggled with navigating change in their life. So those are two big insights that came to me during this period of time and made me realize there's a bigger story here, and that's when we decided to write the book. But then something else happened to me, and I was in the foundry, and we were doing a bronze pour. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with creating bronze sculptures, but at some point after you create the sculpture, you invest it. It's called the lost wax method, and then you take molten bronze and you pour it into it, and that creates the bronze shape. But the molten bronze is heated to about 2,000 degrees, and it's white hot, it's orange hot, and you're dressed in this regalia to protect you against the heat. And we are taking the cauldron, and we're pouring the bronze, and nonetheless the heat is coming in, and the phrase, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, kept coming to mind. And that brought me back to my corporate experience, where it wasn't uncommon in the corporate world to say, well, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. And then I began to realize, the challenge that business leaders face in creating a vibrant, self-renewing organization parallel the challenges that great artists face in building a body of work over time. And that, in fact, what I saw as creative skills and life skills were, in fact, leadership skills. There were parallels. There was this incredible integration between business, the arts, life change. It all came together in terms of the process and the skills. So we created a program called the Innovation Studio. We brought it to senior leaders in corporations, and it was really kind of fascinating because my time is coming up. So there's a lot more to the story, but very quickly, the corporate leaders, while they expressed interest in innovation and creativity, in fact, are very ambiguous about bringing it into their organizations. And that's a challenge and a dilemma moving forward. So to kind of wrap up, Saul had asked me to say, what's my work moving forward? I'm going to continue to work on my artwork. And I have this notion of taking up the challenge from the IBM Global CEO study, which identified creativity as the #1 need for corporate leadership. And I'm putting together a learning platform that will take creativity and make it available to organization leaders where they could bring it into their organizations. So I started by telling the Renoir story and the notion that creativity is a quest, not a gift. And I raised the question that he raised. I think I'm beginning to understand something about it. So I'd like to close simply by saying that this quest changes us. It changes us in very profound ways. Picasso said that I begin with an idea and then it becomes something else. We could say that about our lives, that we begin with an idea of ourselves and then we become something else. We think we're changing organizations and we think we're changing the world, and we are. But we're also changing ourselves in the process. And I think that's what Renoir realized when he said, I think I'm beginning to understand something about it. Thank you.